1 Corinthians chapter 9. Again, remember, this is not a new topic. He's going to seem to digress. In our chapter, section and chapter and format divisions that we have, if I can get this set up correctly here, it can make it easy to think that this is a new topic, but it's not. He's going to come back to the issue of food sacrifice to idols, but he's setting the groundwork here by using himself as an example of someone who's giving up certain rights and freedoms that he actually has, but he's choosing not to use for the sake of others. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? So one of the criteria for being an apostle is seeing Jesus the Lord. Are you not the result of my work in the Lord? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, not everybody accepted Paul as a genuine apostle. Surely I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food? Now this is going to be a big deal in 2 Corinthians. Okay, now he's bringing this up again, not to be its own independent block of thought, but to help set the context by giving himself as an example of someone who has deliberately chosen not to exercise certain rights and freedoms that he has, and that others in his position are using, but he's choosing not to for the sake of others, in this case the Corinthians. But this is going to become an issue. In 2 Corinthians, we're going to find out that the things he's talking about here, in terms of him not accepting payment from Corinth and all that, became a real problem for the Corinthians. That was a credibility issue that they really had a hard time with. So we'll talk about this more in 2 Corinthians. But for now, he's just using himself as an example as someone who has voluntarily given up access to things he could have access to for the sake of others. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles, and the Lord's brothers, and Cephas? Now we've known since the beginning of the Gospels that Peter was married, because we meet his mother-in-law pretty much as soon as Jesus moves in with Peter in his house in Capernaum. So somewhere in there, Peter has had a wife. Now the wife apparently did not follow Peter around when Peter was following Jesus around during Jesus' ministry. But it seems as though once Peter left Jerusalem, he apparently took his wife with him, and she went on the road with him from that point onward, it seems. But no, we really don't. But he had a wife, clearly, and the other apostles did too, and the Lord's brothers did. Or is it only I and Barnabas who must work for these? So Barnabas was like Paul. In fact, Paul might have gotten the idea from Barnabas. Barnabas was in the faith first, before Paul was. He was probably an older man than Paul. So it could be that Paul got this idea from Barnabas. I think that's very likely. They had worked together extensively in the past. Now they've parted company. They're not working together any longer. But Paul still is aware of Barnabas. At this point in time, it seems that Barnabas is still alive and still out there somewhere doing something. And Paul is aware of his activities, even though they're not going to team up together again. But they still live the same way and practice the same lifestyle. Which again, I'm assuming Paul may have even gotten that from Barnabas. So it's only Barnabas and I who must work for a living. Who serves as a soldier at his own expense? Who plants? The army does. Like the army pays you to be a soldier. Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its grapes? And even those who work the vineyard for the vineyard owner get some of the produce from the vineyard as part of their payment. Who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk? Do I say this merely from a human perspective? So basically the idea is that you get what you ought to get paid from what you work at. Like if you're a soldier, the army itself is going to pay you for being a soldier. If you work in someone's vineyard, part of your pay for working in the vineyard will be to eat part of the produce of the vineyard. Do I say this merely from a human point of view? Doesn't the law say the same thing? For it is written in the law of Moses, Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain. That goes back to Deuteronomy 25, verse 4. Now, as the oxen are treading out the grain, they would eat the grain underneath them unless they're muzzled, which means they wouldn't be able to. And God said, don't do that. Is it about oxen that God is concerned? Certainly he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us. Because when the plowman plows and the thresher threshes, they ought to do so in the hope of sharing in the harvest. So some of those Old Testament laws were written as principles for how we should behave and conduct ourselves according to God's desire and design. If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? If others have this right of support from you, shouldn't we have it all this more? So he's saying, I went there and I planted this church. Maybe went back to what he said earlier. I should have the right to expect support from you. But I did not use this right. On the contrary, I don't know who the we is here. I'm assuming he's really referring to himself, but he's kind of making, self-effacing himself somewhat by using a we, even though he's probably really meaning I. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Don't you know? So he didn't do that. He didn't do it. He worked during his time there. He was a tent maker, and he engaged in tent making to pay his own way. He did not bring a wife with him. He did not make use of these rights and these freedoms that he had as an apostle. He did not demand payment from the Corinthians. He did not ask them to support himself, to support his way of life or support him. On the contrary, we put up with anything rather than hinder the gospel of Christ. Don't you know that those who work in the temple get their food from the temple? He's probably referring to the temple in Jerusalem here, not the idol temples. Because the priests ate the food that was brought there. And those who serve at the altar share in what is offered at the altar. In the same way, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel. But I have not used any of these rights. And I am not writing this to you in the hope that you will do this for me. So he's not saying all this to get them to start paying him. He doesn't even intend that. He doesn't want them to do that. And they're going to get mad at him for this. So like I said, in 2 Corinthians, this is going to be a major point of contention because they're going to get mad at him for this. I'd rather die than have anyone deprive me of this boast. Yet when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, for I am compelled to preach. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. Now here he is going on a little bit of a tangent as he explains himself. If I preach voluntarily, I have a reward. If not voluntarily, I am simply discharging the trust commanded to me. What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel, I may offer it free of charge, and so not make use of any of my rights in preaching it. Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. So this goes back to the whole loving love builds up. He's going to do everything he can to put others' needs ahead of his own. Even though he doesn't have to, even though he's free and he could do these things, he's not going to. He's going to put himself in position to win over as many people as he can wherever they may be. To the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I become like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. That's one of the reasons why he does things like circumcising Timothy, who was a half-Jew, or later on taking vows and cutting his hair in the Nazarite tradition of number 6, because he wants to go along with people to whatever degree that he can or must in order to respect them and accommodate them where they are. He did that in Athens. We saw that in Athens as well when he was walking around the marketplace in Athens. To those not having the law, I become like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law. This is not the law, of course, the written law of Moses, but the law of Christ that basically says, Love your neighbor as yourself. So as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I become weak. To win the weak, I become all, wait. To the weak, I become weak. I lost my train of thought there. To the weak, I become weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. And they had a series of games similar to the Olympics here in Corinth every couple of years. I believe they're called the Isthmus Games. I'm not sure. It was not the Olympics, but it was like the second best thing. So they were very used to this. They were very used to athletic competition and races and prizes. The prize was a crown, a laurel crown, a wreath. Anyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. Those wreaths that they wore after they won their races have long since decomposed and gone away. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like a man running aimlessly. I do not fight like a man beating the air, shadowboxing. No, I beat my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. We're going to be reading more about this run your race metaphor that Paul has used here and will use again. We're all in a race, but we're not actually racing against other racers. So like the race that I'm in, like I'm not competing against other racers. Okay, I am running a race to get to the finish line, to be with Christ at the end. And I need to continue running that race. But I'm actually not competing with other people. They're all running their own races. I could get disqualified. I could fall off the track. I could get so miscued. I could end up in, and he's going to talk about that here in chapter 10. I could end up in such a place that I end up disqualifying myself from the finish line. But I'm not going to lose the race because someone else gets to the end ahead of me. Because that's not the kind of race that we're in. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers, that our forefathers were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. So now we're going back to the Exodus. Now we're going back to the flight out of Egypt and into the Promised Land, which of course is a parallel to the real Exodus, which is our flight from sin into the Promised Land of God's forgiveness and Messiah's inheritance. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and the sea. So we're just saying that they were all saved, basically. To compare them to our generation today, they were all in a state of spiritual salvation at the crossing of the Red Sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. That would be similar to the Lord's Supper, the bread and wine. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. So just because, in fact, this is to their shame, they were in this very privileged position. And we said this back when we read through the Exodus accounts 4 years ago now. That these people, the Exodus accounts, the people who lived in Egypt and were taken out of Egypt by God during the Exodus, they had seen all the signs of God in Egypt. They had seen the waters of the Sea of Reeds parting and then closing back down on the Egyptians when they came to chase after them. They were at Mount Sinai. They had been there for a year. They had seen the glory of God come down on Mount Sinai and then fill the tabernacle after they built it. But that wasn't enough. Despite all of that, only two of that generation, Joshua and Caleb, ended up going into the Promised Land. Even Moses didn't make it. All the others ended up dying before they got inside of that generation, despite being eyewitnesses to all these amazing things that God had done to prove his power and his presence. That wasn't enough. So it could be not enough for you too. You got to be careful. You're saved. You're in a state of salvation. You've been baptized just like they were, figuratively, into Moses and the Red Sea. in the cloud and the sea. But they were lost, and you could be too if you're not careful. Now these things occurred as examples, to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and then got up to indulge in pagan revelry. That was after the golden calf incident in Exodus 32. We should not commit sexual immorality as they did, some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. That's in Numbers. We should not test the Lord as some of them did, and were killed by snakes, also in Numbers. And do not grumble as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. So even before they went into the promised land, as they were going out and about, they were having all kinds of faith issues. So just being there and being saved, being in that generation that got to see all that, experience all that, and were baptized figuratively by the cloud and the sea, that wasn't enough. That was not enough. And it may not be enough for you if you disqualify yourself. Paul's not going to get himself disqualified. Paul's going to keep himself in strict training so that he runs his race to completion and will not get disqualified. You got to be careful. There's only one person who can disqualify you, and that's you. You can lose this race. Again, you're not running against anybody else. No one else is going to get to your finish line ahead of you. But you could miss the finish line if you wander off through idolatry or immorality or grumbling or these other things that can turn you away. And that is possible. We read in 1 John that there is a sin that leads to death. There is a way for someone who is in Christ to leave and go after something else. You know, Paul mentioned it here. Paul will even have a guy named Demas who will do that as time goes on. You probably had many others. We just have that one example there. There were probably many others who did that too as well. Temptation can, entice you. We read about that in James, how the process of temptation goes from enticement to action, to sin, to death. And you can choose to put that ahead of Christ. And you can do that, and it can start innocently. Okay? His point here in all of this is to say, be careful about eating this meat. It may be lawful for you to do it, but is it really a good idea? Should you do it? You may have a weak brother next to you who will be drawn back into the pagan lifestyle if he sees you eating meat that the pagans eat. And you yourself may end up that way if you're not careful. These things happened to them as examples, and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages is coming. That'd be true today too. Okay? In fact, it's even more true today because this very letter that Paul is writing is now an example to us. Paul speaks more than he knows here even at this point. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has seized you except what's common to man. So nothing is going to happen to you that hasn't happened to anybody else. Okay? There's nothing special about you. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're dealing with, it's something that has happened to other people at some point in time. Okay? It's something that mankind, you're not alone. You're not unique. You're not exclusive. It's not happening just to you. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so you can stand up under it. So you don't have to engage in this. You don't have to be tempted to go back into idolatry through eating this meat or seeing someone else eat this meat. Okay, you can get out of that. If you fall into it, it's because you're not standing firm and you're not being careful. You can get out of that. You don't have to succumb to that temptation. Therefore, my friends, flee from idolatry. I speak to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. Is not the cup of thanksgiving for which we give thanks a participation in the blood of Christ? This is talking about the Lord's Supper now, which we'll mention again in just a little bit. And is not the bread we break a participation in the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf, we who are many are one body. They break the bread from the one loaf. For we all partake of the one loaf. Now, today, typically speaking, we don't break bread and hand it in pieces to people. I mean, it all comes from one loaf, but someone somewhere along the way has broken it into pieces already and distributed it. Most likely is how it works today. I have not gone to a church ever, actually, where you have just one long loaf of bread that someone cuts into pieces and hands out to people, or that you just go up and take your own slice out of. Today, we hand out slices, these little wafers, that have already been cut up and given out. I think that's acceptable. I hope so, because we have a much longer. In this day and time, the congregations would have been much smaller than they are today, and they would have been in people's homes where they had their own actual bread around their tables. Today, we go to these public buildings, these church buildings that we've built, and we have hundreds of people there, and we've got all this distribution to do. I suppose it's acceptable. Consider the people of Israel. Do not those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? This is ongoing at this point in time, of course. Do I mean, then, that a sacrifice offered to an idol is anything? Or that an idol is anything? Okay, no. You're right, earlier in chapter 8 when we said that these idols aren't real. That's true, they're not. But the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons, not to God. And I do not want you to be participants with demons. So even though the idols themselves are not real, okay, Poseidon is not real, Aphrodite is not real. These statues, these images, these idols that are in these temples that these people are worshiping, those are just statues. Those aren't real. That's true. There is no such thing as Poseidon. There is no such thing as Aphrodite, Athena, Hera, all of them. They're just figments of imagination. But there are evil spiritual forces that stand behind those things. And we don't need to be participating with them, okay? You may not realize it, but when you eat this meat that sacrifices these idols, you're really having fellowship with the demons that stand behind those idols. And we don't need to have anything to do with that. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. Are we trying to arouse the Lord's jealousy? Are we stronger than He? Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. He said this way back in chapter, was it 7? No, 6. The end of 6. This is definitely something that they were saying, and He's responding back to them. He's saying this again now, trying to get them to realize that, yeah, maybe it's permissible, but maybe it's not beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. So here's his final way of summing it up. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's, and everything in it. That goes from Psalm 24:1. So yeah, that meat does come from God. Go to the meat market, buy it, eat it, fine. Eat it for your own at your own house. Eat it as part of your feast before you have the Lord's Supper. That's fine. Don't go to an idol's temple and eat it there, though. There's two separate things they're talking about here. They're talking about meat, okay? Meat that was offered up to an idol and sacrifice. That's the same. But in one context, they're talking about actually going to an idol's temple and eating there as part of some festival or party or ritual or an invitation or dinner or whatever. And part of it is going to the meat market, buying the leftover meat and bringing it home. You can do that just fine. Don't go into the idol's temple. That's pushing it. That's making too much of a risk. Maybe it's not unlawful to do if but that's risky. Okay, you don't want to be careful. That's putting yourself and others in spiritual jeopardy. Maybe it's not a good idea to do that. Go to the meat market, buy the meat, take it home, eat it, offer it to others. Fine. If some unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. I'm not sure if this is going to be in somebody's home or an assembly hall or an idol's temple, but if you have an associate, a business associate, a work associate, trade guild member, something like that, and you're going to a meeting or a party or a dinner, eat it. Don't make a big deal about it. Just eat it. But if someone says to you, "This has been offered in a sacrifice," then do not eat it, both for the sake of the man who told you and for conscience's sake, the other man's conscience. I mean, not yours. So apparently this is another believer who doesn't want to eat this meat and thinks that you shouldn't either, presumably. For why should my freedom be judged by another man's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something that I thank God for? Okay, so I have the right to do that, and I would do that. But let's not cause trouble for each other. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everybody in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. Follow my example, as I follow the example of Christ. Now he'll get back to this whole issue of meat, eat, sacrifice to idols again in Romans. I believe it's Romans chapter 13, I think. And it's interesting how we can track the development of this thought throughout the New Testament. Because initially, again, the church would have been entirely made up of Jews. Not only would they not have sacrificed their meat to idols, there's even large categories of food they wouldn't have eaten at all, the unclean foods. Then you have the whole opening up to Gentiles thing in Acts 10, and that creates its own set of controversies. And they get together for the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15, and they end up writing a letter. And one of the things they say in this letter in Acts 15, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us not to burden you with anything beyond the following requirements. You were to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, because Jews drained the blood out of the meat when they ate it, and most Gentiles would not have. From the meat of strangled animals and from sexual immorality. You'll do well to avoid these things. But here, Paul has a long discussion about how, well, yeah, you can eat food sacrificed to idols in the right circumstances. Okay, you can do it with a clean conscience if you're not harming a brother nearby. And that is, so you're seeing a development of thought go on as we progress. It's one of the advantages to reading these letters kind of in the order in which they would have been written, because you can kind of track certain things like that as we go on.